My name is Mafani Imungi. If you forget that 2 minutes after I say it, feel free to walk up to me and I'll remind you my name every time you ask me, and I have a name tag. I'm the director of the field program. I've been here since August, and it's been a steep learning curve, but I'm happy to be a part of the UW-Madison Social Work School of Social Work community. It's a great program. They really do pride themselves in working with our social work students and preparing them to become practitioners who will join you in the work that you do to combat marginalization and work with underprivileged groups. Today, we're hoping that you're going to enjoy the workshop that we have lined up for you. We brought in some speakers from across the Lake, Michigan. Professor Lois Owens, who is a wonderful diversity trainer and who I have had the opportunity of observing and sort of see her presentations, and it's amazing that every time she does one of these, I learn something. So again, I want to welcome you, say thank you. Remember that this day is all about you, geared towards the UW-Madison School of Social Work, letting you know how much we appreciate the effort that you put towards working with our students year after year. Many of you having done this for 20, 30, 10 years, and we just want to let you know that we appreciate that. On my right is Cindy Ragland, the Associate Director of Field Education, and I'll let her say hello to you this morning.
Hi, really glad you're here. We have full-time folks here, we have part-time folks here, and it's just glad to see everyone together and mixing up. One of the things I want to point out to you is your agenda that's in your folder on the left-hand side at the very bottom. We're going to start, of course, at 8 o'clock. We'll start promptly. We're going to take a break at 10. We'll resume the workshop at 10:15, and then we're going to take lunch at noon. If you're not staying for lunch, your CEUs will be available for you at the table out here as you exit the room. And if you are staying for lunch, when you finish lunch, stop by the table and we'll get your CEUs for you there. If there's ever anything that comes up that I can help you with or you have questions about, feel free to give me a call. Thanks for being here.
And then before we get to our guest speaker to do the presentation, I'd like to introduce Dr. Anna Haley Locke, who's the Associate Director of the School of Social Work, to greet you this morning.
Good morning, everybody. It's a pleasure to see all these faces. I wrote notes once. It took me trying out 3 different Marriotts to get to the right place. So I need to, unlike Lois, who's just graceful, and Cindy as well, I need a little note-taking. So thank you very much for coming. We are so grateful. And thanks so much to Dr. Smith Owens and her colleagues for joining us today for what I think is going to be just an incredible morning for all of us. It is definitely, the content that we're going to get today is something that we take very seriously and value greatly at the school in terms of developing personal and professional stances among our students around issues of power and privilege, multiculturalism, social justice, the themes that we try to weave into our curriculum and are continually trying to improve upon with our students. So given that focus, we're really grateful to have all of you here, given your key role in partnering with us to educate our students, to engage in conversational learning about these critical issues. This event also gives me the opportunity to publicly declare my absolute delight and our huge fortune at being able to lure Mafoni to the school to direct our field program. She is, as someone who studies and teaches on leadership, I find her to be just a magnificent leader who is full of vision and integrity and creativity. So we are incredibly fortunate to have her. And without further ado, I will let her take back over to introduce the speaker.
Thank you, Anna, and the $5 I paid her to say all that good words about me was totally worth it. So next I'd like to introduce our speaker, who will introduce her entourage that she came along with. Professor Lois Smith Owens and I have known each other for a while. After graduating from Michigan State University, I was hired at Grand Valley State University, where I worked as a field coordinator and then directed their field program, and then became an assistant professor. But Professor Owens was the one person I could count on to come to me and ask me if I had read a certain book on diversity. And after a while, she figured out that she should never start her sentences by asking me, have you read? Because my answer was always no. I said, let's cut the chase and just ask me, would you be interested in reading this book? And I found that all the books that she asked me to read were books that stretched my mind, stretched my imagination. And you'll find that exactly the same way that she tailors her presentation does that. I know oftentimes when we talk about diversity, we tend to deal with it at a very surface level. But when it comes to diversity and thinking about the way our country is becoming highly global, highly integrated, I think you're all aware that right now we don't talk anymore about black and white. That was a way that we could term people from different origins a while back, but given the way the world has become global, we found that we need to stretch the way we think about diversity. And I'm sure that you're finding that in the human service agencies that you're working for, you're coming into contact with populations perhaps that you really didn't think would be seeking services for you. So as social workers, we find that there's a constant need for us to think and grow about diversity. And we're hoping that the presentation that Professor Owens will give today won't give you necessarily a toolkit for dealing with each and one of those individuals, because as social workers, we know that even if two people come from the same race, ethnic group, same community, or the same skin tone, come from the same ethnic group, that they have differences among them that you wouldn't automatically know until we get to learn more about their history. So what she will give you today instead is a toolkit that using your cultural competence, you can be able to change and modify to be able to work with the different populations that you'll encounter. And I hope that you will enjoy her presentation as much as I have over the years, and that you'll walk away here with skills that you can use not only in your work life, but also in your personal life as you work with people and talk with people who are different from you. Professor Lois Smith-Owens, welcome.
Thank you. I have to figure out which button to hit because I'm hooked here today. Let's see, I think I've got the right one. Yes, okay. Can you hear me? Everyone? No? Alrighty then, let's see. I'll have to take it off and put it back on. I've got one on each side. If I wanted to have small hips, it's all over. I don't have small hips, so I guess there's nothing to really worry about. I have one here and one that I'm trying to hide there, and I have two tweeters on my body someplace, or whatever you call those microphones, and I feel like any moment I might have an electric charge emit from my body, like so, but I'll be all right. Good morning. Thank you so much for coming. I really, really appreciate this. It's a large group of people. But I am going to try to present this morning something that's fairly interactive, where you can get up and move about, won't have to sit the entire time. I am not a lecturer, though I do have diarrhea of the mouth, and there are times that I have to catch myself from blah, 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 blah. So I'll try not to do that and to keep you involved and as interested as I possibly can. I'd like to introduce my posse first, the gang that I travel with and work with. They are my colleagues from Grand Valley State University, and we just decided to take a road trip up here, the girls, to see a friend who is dear to all of us. This young lady is dear to my heart, and so I am so pleased to be able to be here for her. But let me ask my wonderful posse, and they are here also as my security, so you need to behave, because they like me a lot. And they might turn around and look at you in a bad way if you're not nice to me today. So here you go. This is Miss Esther Visser, who is the office coordinator of the School of Social Work at Grand Valley. You should let them, they can't see you, you're short. Thank you. And this is Miss Brenda Mitchner, who is the Associate Director of Housing at Grand Valley. And this is Dr. Elaine Schott, revered, loved and appreciated by everybody for her wisdom and knowledge and for her absolute presence in the School of Social Work almost since its inception. Welcome us, please. Thank you.
Test your microphone.
Can you hear me? Yes. That's better? Thank you very much. Out of the valleys of whatever. All righty. So I am here to, let me just say this. First of all, in life, now my next venture hopefully will be to do stand-up comedy. So I'll be practicing on you while I'm here. I try not to get too out of the line with it, but my name when I go on stage so that I can get attention will be the Almost Nasty Granny. So I will stay away from that and just try to infuse periods of time where at least you have a little bit to smile about, because sitting for 4 hours is a really serious thing, and you need to have a little bit of something where you can walk away and say, well, at least I smiled, whether I got anything else or not. A little bit about me. I am relatively down the line in terms of age. I grew up in Manistee, Michigan, which is a northern Michigan town. I grew up during the Jim Crow era. I was born in the 30s. And so we were the only African Americans in the town, which taught us a whole new way of living. It's still not working. Ooh. Okay, now something is working. And as a result of it, I have a different perspective, a different lens on life. I grew up in a family of 10 children, 5 boys and 5 girls, with a father who never learned how to read or write, and a mother who went to the 3rd grade, but we all went to college, which is kind of an interesting situation. So as a result of that, I have what we call, I guess, a middle-class Negro family, because back then we were still Negroes. Now we are aging. I think my youngest sibling is like 66, and the oldest is 81. And we're still turning in circles around each other saying, who are you? Why are you here in my house? As we figure out who we are and move along. And I've decided that retiring is a difficult thing for me to do, so I just keep going. And as a result of that, I've really had some really interesting experiences in terms of what I now refer to as cultural competency. Because I think it is very important that we become culturally aware. Diversity is what you all have brought here to this group. As I look out, I don't see a lot of people of color, but I see tremendous diversity, because each of you brings your own experiences, your own background, your own history, your own life, your own lenses. And as a result of it, no one in here has the same experience. So you bring tremendous diversity in terms of who you are. When it becomes cultural competency, we're talking about being aware of other cultures, other populations, other people, being sensitive to what it means to talk with persons with disabilities, what it means to talk to the LGBTQ community, what it means to talk with people who are, we call populations at risk, which is something I think we ought to think about as social workers. When we say populations at risk, we begin already putting them in a weaker position, and we need to maybe think about rephrasing and reframing some of our language, because then we too are impacted by that. If we say we're working with populations at risk, then what we're seeing are not human beings who have come for assistance, but populations at risk, which is a negative. So I tend to teach from that perspective. How do we change our own lenses? I call it truth or consequences, because you have to deal with your own truths about yourself, and then you have to deal with the consequences of your own truths. And sometimes within the workshops, people do get some kinds of little triggers about what their own truths are. And then they have to deal with the consequences of it. We find out what our biases are. We find out what our prejudices are. And we're often not able to say what they are. We can't acknowledge or admit them to ourselves. And so in this process today, hopefully that's one of the things that we will end up doing, is finding out more about ourselves. And I have to say, I'm well down the road toward 76, but my whole thing in life is to continue to be aware of the issues that I have in terms of my own biases and my own prejudices. They continue to stay there. I call it the ticker tape that runs across the back of your neck, like on the TV on NBC or Fox. It's constantly moving, and you're having a hard time looking at the show and reading the ticker tape at the same time. But it keeps running. Well, all day, every one of us in this room runs around with a ticker tape, making judgments, assessments, Oh, what's she got that dress on for? Oh, who told her she should wear her hair like that? My God, that's the worst haircut. Did you see her? She's got a muffin top and she doesn't seem to know it. What's she wearing those tights for? You know, we go on through the day, every day, all day long, making a comment. I wish that kid would pull his pants up. I can see his underwear. Da, 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 on and on and on. So we do this. And we do it sometimes in harsher ways than we think because it's just a part of our everyday life. The point is to be aware of your ticker tape. And so today I'm hoping that I can share with you how I'm aware of my ticker tape and how you might work with yours as well, and a few other things. I have one of my working partners, Ms. Michener, and I have workshops that we do together where we enlighten people about their ticker tapes, except it's a large exercise that takes place on the floor and we can only do like 40 people at a time, and there's more than 40 people in here. So we won't be doing it. But every little tool that you can find to help you assess you is as important as you assessing a client. And so I will start today with this first slide, which says truth or consequences. And I don't have the clicker. Esther, could you, just click, thank you. I think I can do this. He told me how to do it. There we go. So here's the purpose of the exercise. And we are going to discover I hope, what our own perspectives are and how we go about doing that. And we have a group exercise. If you look in your folder, you will find somewhere in there a piece of paper that says, shh. And it's on, I think maybe the third paper back on the right-hand side of your folder? Isn't this it?
It doesn't say.
Should be there. This says icebreaker. Okay, it doesn't say shh, it says favorite color. My graduate assistant and I did not move along appropriately. That says favorite color. And on that, you will find that it's asking you to do some things. Now, here's what you have to do first. Everyone in this room, and this is my own personal icebreaker, so this is going to be interesting. Everyone in this room is no longer whatever age you are. You must take yourself back. So I can do this. I can wave my magic wand and say, you are now falling asleep. You're going back, you're going back, you're going back. You're 8, you're 9, maybe you're 10. But you're young. And you are not only young, you are not an American. You have arrived here last week from Ethiopia, from Burma, from Nepal, from Sudan, from Trinidad, from any country that does not speak English as a regular everyday thing. And you have arrived here and you are in your first day at the school. You do not speak English. You do not know the alphabet in English. You are unable to communicate in any kind of way other through sign language, maybe. And I'm not talking about the formal sign language. You are able to smile. You are able to sing because music is universal. You are able to touch, but carefully. And you must find out, without speaking to one another, all the answers to what's on the paper, beginning with the favorite color and moving through to your dad's middle name, I think is on this one. Yes. But you may not speak. Now, if you do speak to your partner, I will have one of my partners run down and thump you on the back of the head, or you will see me after class. It's just that simple. And there'll be an extra penalty for that. So really, this is an exercise in terms of looking at how people communicate and don't communicate. So you need to turn to the person next to you. It needs to be 2 people at a time, if at all possible. When you can't do that, there can be 3. And you need to find out that information from each other without talking. You may draw all of the pictures you want to draw. You may not write down numbers. You may not count numbers necessarily so that you can get to a letter, 1 for A, 2 for B. Don't do that. You don't know the alphabet. And I will keep my eye on you, all 4 of them. So you need to find out what you can in terms of those specific questions from the person sitting next to you without opening your mouth. Now, you may also bark. You may meow. We had a gentleman once who spent most of his time in the corner going, wah! You know, and it was really getting, wah! Kept going on, and finally someone told him to sit down and be quiet, please, because he was disturbing, and it was a group of police officers, about 100 of them. Turned out he was an elephant. But at any rate, that was the animal he most admired, so that's what he was using. At any rate, you get the idea. So there can be as many yips, barks, squeaks, chickens clucking, and whatever it is you want, but you may not talk to the individual. You can say, mm-hmm. You can laugh till you fall down on the floor. You can even roll across the floor if that will help you be a tumblebug. But whatever you need to do is what you do, except you do not speak to one another. You can write down the answer only when you know you get that. And you'll know when you arrive at the answer because the other person will be going, right? And then they'll start over again, like that. So I need you to do this. You have approximately 10 minutes to do it in, and we are ready, set, go. Find somebody and do it. No talking. Wasn't that amazing that the minute I said you're done, what happened? A total cacophony, all right? Total cacophony. Anxious to speak. So talk about this experience. What's the first thing that happened to you in this process? You're looking at me like I'm crazy. Other than that, what's the first thing that happened to you?
Frustration.
Frustration. Okay, what else?
Helplessness.
Helplessness, yes. Inadequacies.
First thing I thought of was that we could read what we were trying to ask, so it was easier than it would be in real life.
It was, yes, it's easier than it would be in real life, but then we have to do the best we can with what we have. So, okay. Anybody else? What did you feel? Yes?
Wanting to understand.
Wanting to understand, but really couldn't always get through, right? What other kinds of things? Yes?
Well, there was confusion a little bit about what you wanted from us.
Okay, right?
What exactly the rules were.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Anything else? Yes?
Intimidated by you?
Intimidated by me? I am bad. I am very good. Yes?
I feel like I might be in the minority here, but I thought fun, excited, curious.
Challenge.
Challenge, fun, excited, curious. Okay. Yes, keep going. Here you go.
Understood.
Misunderstood? Yes, okay.
I felt like I had to start using some kind of creativity side of my brain that I don't usually use.
Had to use creativity. Very, very true. Coming down, yes?
I just felt like some of the questions were not, like what street did you live on when you were 12? Coming from a different country, you may not have had a street that you were living on.
That's true.
There might not be a middle name that you're assigned or anything like that.
That's
So
true.
even try and translate that verbally or non-verbally would be almost impossible.
Right. Okay, yes, sir?
The easiest to communicate about was color.
Color, right. That's the easiest thing because it's a universal thing, yes?
I felt very proud of my partner when he got it right.
Aha, I'm proud of your partner. What does this then say to us as a learning experience? How can you apply this to your everyday work or working with young people even, working with people who are clients who may not have had a street, but yet on the form it says, what street do you live on? And how many of you have forms that say, what street do you live on? What's your address? Okay, so what else does it say to you in terms of a learning experience, maybe? Come on, I hope you learned something from it besides how loud you can be afterward. Yes?
I noticed I was worried about letting her down as a part of it.
As a part of a team, yeah, okay. Yes, ma'am.
And some people might have a sense of giving up because they think it's impossible to break through it.
Right, and people do give up when they come into your office and say, I don't know how to do this, yes?
And after all that work, you haven't gotten any complex conversation, so it's so simplistic and you really haven't even scratched the surface.
Right, and this is part of the experience of sometimes clients and or sometimes students. If you have international students, sometimes there's difficulty. Yes?
I just was struck at how hard it was, and we're of the same culture, and so we could use cultural references that we understand, and it was still tough.
Right. That is very true. We're of the same culture, and you still had difficulty communicating with one another as long as you could not speak. So for the person who doesn't speak any English and comes in, or for the person who is from a totally different culture and misses the cues, like chalk that up on the board. What does chalk that up on the board mean to somebody from another country? Any of the little cliches we use frequently have nothing to do with how someone else sees and thinks about the world. So that's my ice-breaking exercise, and I also would like to know how many of you found out the name of the person next to you or introduced yourselves to one another in any kind of nonverbal way? Okay, it's very hard. It's very hard if I am coming from someplace else and I'm a refugee who's just come in, say for instance, to a Bethany Christian Services, and I'm off to meet someone, or I'm at the airport, and my name is one of those names that you find hard to pronounce, like perhaps Kujichagalia. And so when you say my name is Kujichagalia, then can you say Kujichagalia? Hello, Kujichagalia. How many people can say Kujichagalia? Yeah. Yes, and we stumble over it, and we refuse sometimes to say names appropriately. I have a friend who says Ghanadian all the time for Ghanaian, and nothing, she can't hear it any other way except Ghanadian. I often wonder how the people who are Ghanaians feel about it, and they're always very courteous. They're always very courteous. No one ever says anything. But I think about it all the time, because if I'm an African American, then I would like to be seen as an African American, and I'd like somebody to be able to pronounce the word African and American. It just seems logical to me, so that you work at doing these things. However, we're not perfect. We are imperfect beings, and how we see life through our own individual lenses is one of the pieces that we want to talk about here. And looking at how we function and operate as social workers, as people who are working with different populations, who are working with students, who are working with people all around, the issue of lenses becomes important. We have legacies, we have layers. We can become an assimilationist. Most of you, I'm sure, are familiar with what it means to be an assimilationist, how we involve ourselves within another culture. We can be colorblind. But when you're colorblind, what then happens to a person of color? If you don't see color, what happens to the person of color if you're colorblind? I don't see color. Well, then you probably don't see me. And I'm very large and wearing bright colors today. So I hope that you see me. If you're a cultural centrist, then you move toward the middle, where people are thinking about, okay, we are all going to merge into this wonderful puree. But we're more like salads with dressings over the top of them. And so there is broccoli, and there are green peppers, and there's red peppers, and there's a little bit of cauliflower, and there's spinach and lettuce and romaine. There are all these different things in this salad. So we really aren't very centrist at all in our thinking. And then there are those of us who are elitists, and therefore we are just a step ahead of everyone else, just a cut above everyone else, and we tend to see everyone else other than our own special group as less than. Integrationists are also similar to being cultural centrists, except they're true believers in the business of integration. Integration doesn't always work. You can't always emulsify when you're dealing with integration. Integration can be just as simple as one person sitting next to another with no communication taking place or no understanding taking place. A meritocratist, a multiculturalist, a seclusionist, merit, you get where you are based on merit. My grandparents came to this country and they worked hard. They worked very hard, and that's why they got where they are. And my parents worked hard too. And they didn't have any money, and they didn't speak English, but they made it. So how come you people can't, whichever group you're talking about? But you have to have a level playing field. You have to have a level playing field. You have to have a history that is similar. You have to come to a place where everyone is given the opportunity to succeed. So we believe in here in America that everyone has the opportunity to succeed. All you have to do is be American. Then you can be a multiculturalist, because you can see proof of everyone being the same. And so we multi-mix ourselves up, and we all have the opportunity to move ahead. And oftentimes when we move ahead, then we become a seclusionist, and we move out of our groups because now we can isolate ourselves. We've secured ourselves with all that we need. If we're transcendent, we move above it. I don't think very many people rise above it all and really have that 11th lens where we believe, basically, that everyone is worth value, has dignity, should receive respect at all times. I don't think that we do that. I think we look at first appearance, based on what people look like, how they're dressed, whether their hair is combed, whether they have all their teeth in place, whether their shoes are shined, whether they smell right. All of those things move into our ticker tape where we make these little judgments, but we don't talk about them because that wouldn't be appropriate. We just think them. We just tuck it away in the corner of your mind. And then we have victims who buy into it. I am African American and therefore I'm a victim of oppression for hundreds and hundreds of years. And therefore I'm not going to do anything about it because I can't, because the oppression is so great. And sometimes for some people the oppression is that great. That's because they don't see any way out. But we're not very forgiving of that. We are looking for other things to happen. And some people don't know that they have the choice to make a choice about life. And the caretakers are people like me. I'm an enabler and a caretaker. I'm always saying, let me help. Or here, you can have this. Or here, I'll do that. And I've been working on it for about 50 years, and I'm not really getting a lot better. And some of you out there are not getting a lot better either. We are called the soft touch, the bleeding heart. She just does for everybody. She's just so nice. Or he's just absolutely amazing. He's always there when you need him. And we need to think about how we do that as well, and how often it becomes a part of the caretaker syndrome that really can be translated into enabler. And I am the world's biggest fish. What is the world's biggest fish? A sucker. Okay, that would be me. So we need to think about how and where you fit into this, and what is your role. Okay, let's see if I've got this right. So we value diversity and awareness and acceptance differences. And we understand the way people define their health and their family, and we understand how our own culture influences how we think and act. We look at the client's culture. We institutionalize cultural knowledge and become familiar. And we also need to look at the dynamics of differences. We need to look at power differentials all the time as well. So I have a little something that I took from several authors that I'd just like to share with you. And I'm going to have to read it because I couldn't memorize it all. The banks don't work that way anymore. The bushings are bending up here. The struggle for social justice is usually conceived of in terms of empowering clients who may be oppressed by class, race, gender, and sexuality. Little attention is given to the ways in which positioning of the professional worker may embody class, race, gender, and sexual privilege. Social workers need to be aware of how their own power and privilege are maintained or challenged in their encounters with both clients and other staff. Rossiter said this in 2000. In 2004, Baldwell noticed how social workers have ignored the ways in which their practice and their conduct of social agencies are shaped by the social construction of whiteness and white privilege. Okay? They demonstrate the way in which white privilege dictates how issues of importance are identified and how the institutionalizing of that privilege in the organization shapes the limitations of critical reflection. Carniol in 2005 says, and I think he's probably one of the few people that I looked at who suggests that social workers discuss the importance of analyzing our own social location, where we fit in the system, where we live, where we entertain ourselves, who comes to our homes, what we have in our homes. We need to look at our location prior to analyzing the social location of others, okay? He suggests that the importance of using our own critical consciousness to deepen our awareness of our privileges as well as our oppressive circumstances. And remember, even the oppressor is oppressed by the simple chore of having to be the oppressor. Okay? Such an awareness is an important first step if we're going to become involved in challenging oppression and undoing privileges. But when we talk about challenging an oppression and undoing privileges, it's more than seeing a client. It's where you take yourself, where your mind goes, where you begin to examine self and look at the biases and the prejudices and the stereotypes that you carry on a regular basis. And even though we are advocates for oppressed workers, it's really very difficult for us to recognize our own privileges, just as it is for us to recognize and accept the privileges of other privileged groups. Constantly in my cultural competence class, when students have to identify through their values papers and their journals what populations they have the biggest problems with, many of them say, regardless of their racial identity, that they are really, really perturbed with wealthy people. And then they identify who wealthy people are for them. And oftentimes those people probably are maybe millionaires twice or millionaires 3 times, but they're not truly wealthy. When you're truly wealthy, you're being Bob Gates or you're being people of that level. But they really resent the privilege of those communities where people live in the big houses. That's how they write about it. Huge houses, have servants, more than 1 car. Their kids were tough to go to school with because they were so arrogant because they had so much money. And Grand Rapids, Michigan is a town with a little bit of money. I think it's listed as 3rd in the nation in terms of its monetary well-being. Amway, Pew, a few other big names that take place there. And so the university benefits from it. And as a result of it, we move forward, but at what cost? At what cost? And what kind of political power then does that give? So they write about that a lot. So social workers then need to look at ourselves as educated people, how we appear to those people that we work with. Some who are white and male and heterosexual, and they accrue privileges that women don't get. So we have this hierarchy that's always in place. Then Bailey suggests by focusing solely on oppression that we reinforce this structured invisibility of privilege. And if we're going to develop a comprehensive account of the sources of oppression, then we need to understand how privilege is constructed and maintained. And we need to be attentive in the ways in which we assist in maintaining it. Okay, and so when we critically explore the issues of privilege, we need to identify key characteristics. And most privilege is not recognized by those who have it. They don't recognize it as privilege. In fact, one of the functions of privilege is to structure the world so that the mechanisms of privilege are invisible. Absolutely invisible, in the sense that they are unexamined to those who benefit from them. So not being aware of privilege is an important aspect of being privileged. It's like saying, when you get up in the morning and look in the mirror, do you look at your color first? Anybody willing to respond or just shake their head or wave their hand? Do you look in the mirror and say, I'm white? Well, there's hardly a morning that I don't wake up and look in the mirror and see this beautiful brown face, and I'm conscious of it. Conscious of it. And I think many people of color are constantly conscious of their color. I could be wrong. I can't speak for all people of color. But we know we are people of color. The dominant group doesn't have to think about being white. But people of color have to every day make sure that they're aware of their color. Because that's how the system actually works. So when we move forward in looking at stereotypes, myths, prejudices, biases, all of those things, we're talking about the role that white privilege has institutionalized for us all, and we accept what is happening. So, I have here 2 people may misjudge the other's actions based on learned expectations. Both of them will bring culturally prescribed patterns of communication and etiquette and problem solving, so that you and I, the lady in the purple shirt whose name I don't know, and I'm not going to call it because I can't see that well, but I do have new glasses. Aren't they cute? Thank you. Okay. we might have the same stereotypes, but we could have underlying issues that caused us to have the same stereotypes. And therefore, working with someone who is different may be different for each of us. So I might see somebody who is a character in the office as someone who's lovable. You may see them as an annoyance. That's the simplest way to say it. I might find that personality to be very delightful. But for someone else, they're an annoyance. I'm probably an annoyance in my office because I'm the loudest person in there. And people know when I'm coming. I am the stereotype for black women. Big, black, intimidating, loud, assertive, almost aggressive. I tell a lot of bad jokes. I laugh a lot. You always know when I'm there. All the stereotypes fit, all of them. I like them. That's who I am. I can also be quiet. I can be courteous. I can be appropriate. I can give speeches. I can dress right. I can speak right. In fact, for a long time, people told me I sounded like I was white. So I worked hard at coming up with what I thought was sounding like black. My mother was disappointed. She wanted to know what was wrong with me. I can remember my sister Betty came home from college. She's the youngest girl. And my mother took her into the bathroom to have a long talk with her about her mouth, because the bathroom was the place she went to have long talks. So when Betty came home saying, what was one of the things that she said that was absolutely my mother was outraged. Oh, a joke that she thought she'd learned in college that the whole family should be delighted with. What is the cry of the constipated ape? Deep from the heart of the jungle comes the cry of the constipated ape. That's what she said at the dinner table. And everyone looks at her. But Betty had been mixing with African Americans, or at that time I think we were maybe Negroes, or maybe black. Were we black? No, she's 70. It might not have been black yet. Colored. Okay, we were colored, all right. It's hard to remember. And she says, as everyone's looking at her, she was excused from the table immediately, because you don't talk about constipated apes at the table, nor do you say, okay? So we as kids had to make real shifts in order to fit in between two worlds, and it was very, very difficult. And some of us chose maybe not such the best path in the beginning, trying to figure out who we are. And my mother had all of her stereotypes based on what she had been doing for her life. She moved to Manistee when she was 21 years old. She had one child. She and my father were the only two people of color there other than the Native Americans who lived across the street. Interestingly enough, the Native Americans were considered less than us. And it was definitely a sundown town. And why they allowed them to stay, I do not know. But my mother and father, my mother in particular, adopted every single behavior of that white community as her model for raising her children. And so that's how we were raised. To this day, I struggle with my white lens. It has not yet been something that I could say, I can toss over here. I don't have that. I don't have that capability because my early programming is so strong. In order for her to protect us and make sure that we lived well and did not get hurt, we learned how to be correct in the presence of white people and how to imitate them as much as possible. That would be not assimilationist, that is total immersion. That's total immersion. So that's when I learned early on, without knowing about it, how the institution of white privilege works as a child. And we all need to be aware of the fact that it is indeed an institution and it works for those for whom it's supposed to work. So as I move on, I'm hoping I'm doing this right. I'm never sure about these things. You see here that culture refers to integrated patterns of human behavior that include the language, the thoughts, the communications, the actions, customs, etc., and institutions of racial, ethnic, religious, or social groups. And competence implies having the capacity to function effectively with all these groups as an individual and as an organization within the context of the cultural beliefs and behaviors presented by our consumers and our communities. And that's often where we fail because we don't know what their culture asks of us. So there are simple, if you're working with an Indian family or a Muslim family that has just arrived in the country, there are some things you probably should know if you're working with that particular group. So that's one of the main ingredients, cultural competency, is closing the gap. It's the way clients and social workers can come together and talk. Right now in my cultural competency class, students, rather than doing a cross-cultural experience, are working with Bethany Christian Services. 5 of them are assigned to a family. They meet the family at the airport. They take the family to their home. They go with the family shopping to the thrift stores. They take the family to their first medical visits. They take the family to their ESL classes. They prepare dinners on weekends and eat with them because that is their cross-cultural experience. So they're dealing with people from Burundi, from Burma, from Ethiopia, from Somali, from Bosnia, from Albania. They're working with clients who are coming into Bethany as refugee people, and that's how they're learning their cross-cultural experience. It's very difficult for them. One of the most difficult things is, in terms of a cultural experience that they've never had, they have to ride the bus in Grand Rapids, Michigan. And for many of them, that is absolutely fearful. They say things like, my parents told me never to get on bus because only thugs and poor people ride on buses. They'll try to take your purse and they'll be ugly. And so some of them were absolutely terrified to ride on the bus in Grand Rapids, Michigan. The bus in Grand Rapids, Michigan is a bus that picks up people who don't have cars. That's basically what it is. People who don't have transportation. But they have fears that have been programmed into them. So their ability to be culturally competent just in terms of knowing how to ride a bus. What culture rides the bus? How many of you ride the bus to work? And what do you think about the culture of your bus? Very diverse, very diverse. Okay, but how many hands were raised and I said, how many of you ride the bus? Maybe 4? Because we don't do that. This is an individualistic country. You don't do that. And we make ourselves as comfortable as we can at all times. We are truly about the business of being comfortable. Health, healing, and wellness belief systems. Those people who are seeking mental health care and their attitudes, okay, and we look at the delivery of services provided by the provider, and you're looking at it through your own limited set of values. And that does compromise us. We're looking at also the increasing populations in this country. We've been told time and time again that in another 20 years, this will be a country of color, that people of color will dominate. What does that do to the fears and the belief systems of those persons who consider themselves the true Americans? What kind of fears do they have? No one has to answer. All you have to do is think about it. What do your parents and your grandparents say when they think about the country becoming a country of color? What has happened to, quote, their America, unquote? Those are the things you need to constantly think about in order to be culturally competent, because senior citizens in this country are one of the populations that you need to be aware of. And that is a big fear for many of them. That the country that they look at as theirs, which should be managed and well run by people who look like them, is very, very important. To have neighbors who do not look like them is very, very important. To know that if they're walking downtown on certain streets, they believe that something bad is going to happen to them. To be aware of those things is being culturally competent about the population called senior citizens. So it's not just people of color, it's not just refugees or immigrants, it's everybody. To be aware of the fact that when you're talking to someone who uses a wheelchair, that you don't talk to the person who is pushing it rather than the person who's using the wheelchair. Or when you're talking to someone who's blind, can you hear me? I wanted you to know that I'm saying so-and-so. And the person is blind. Come on now. We do this. We do this all the time. We have to think about populations not based on race or ethnicity, but populations across the board. And we don't do that really very often, think about how many populations we're talking about. I have another exercise for you, and all you have to do is stand up or sit down. So I'm going to call out some things, and I'm going to ask you to stand up or remain seated. When you stand, look around you and see who is standing, okay? And so I'm turning the pages. I'm getting there. I'm getting there. I'm getting there. I'm getting there. I'm almost there. I'm there. Okay. Simple exercise. Stand up, sit down. For each statement made, think yes or no. If you think yes, stand up. If you think no, remain seated. Here we go. It'll get your blood warmed up. You know, your knees will work better. Okay. Your ancestors of origin came here of their own free will. If you say yes, stand up. Look around. Sit down, please. Thank you. You're going to do this several times. You live on land that formerly belonged to Native Americans. If you think yes, stand up. Look around. Anybody sitting down? Sit down. Thank you. You define yourself as an immigrant. Stand up if you say yes. Remain seated if you say no. Would you like to tell them, Dr. Mungi? Okay, that's not what I mean. What is the answer? Everyone in this room is an immigrant. Nobody arrived here in the year 10,000 BC. Your ancestors, I don't think you knew who they were. Everyone in this room is an immigrant. Everybody, including me, except I didn't go through Ellis Island. In 1910, 90% of all African Americans had been here for 100 years. In 1910, 10% of all European Americans had been here for 100 years, because they came through Ellis Island. We came on a ship in 1619. So you need to look at, you are immigrants, I am an immigrant, but only 3 people stood up when I said, how many of you are immigrants? How did America get formed? How did America get formed? You have to think about these things. All right. All right. Your parents lived in a community or neighborhood where few, if any, people of color lived. Stand up if you say yes. Sit down if you say no. Okay, look around. Sit down, please. Thank you. How many of you grew up in a community where there were only people of color and few, if any, whites? Look around. Thank you. You always knew you would go to college. Stand up. Thank you. Your parents went to college. Wonderful. Of course, you're all young. Okay, sit down. Your grandparents went to college. Amazing. Looking around, see who's standing up? Okay, thank you. You have items in your home that reflect your familiarity with other cultures. Very good, very good. All right, sit down, thank you. Your attendance and your watching of movies that reflect the lives and cultures of Latinos, Asians, Native Americans, etc., as part of your general movie interest is something that's natural to you. Stand up. Sit down. Thank you. You can always vote for candidates who reflect your race. You can always vote for candidates who reflect your race. Are you looking around? Thank you. You rarely need to enter the inner city to gain access to food, clothing, and other commodities. Think about where you shop. Have a seat, thank you. You have Ebony, Essence, and Latino magazines displayed on your coffee tables and in your home in the mail on a regular basis. Oh, okay. Look around. All right. Thank you. You do not worry about where you send your children to school. You do not worry about where you send your children to school. Thank you. You live in a neighborhood where you feel you're generally safe and you can see yourself reflected at all times. Okay, thank you. And my last one. You don't need to think about race and racism every day. In fact, you don't. You can choose when and where you wish to respond to racism. Okay, are you looking around? Good. Thank you. Have a seat. Now, I just have to ask you to tell me what you thought while the questions were being read and how you felt about it. And if anybody needs a microphone, I have some, the posse will run. So can I get some verbal responses? Thank you. That way I'll get a drink of water. Anyone else? Thank you all for sharing very much. I truly appreciate that, because otherwise workshops don't work. So we know that key elements of cultural competency are the desire to become culturally competent and to be aware and to have knowledge. And that awareness really is also about being aware of self. This is about isms. I like that word, isms. Maintaining our isms often leads to the use of microaggressions, micro-insults, and micro-invalidations. And all of this work is from Daryl Wing Sue, and I'm sure that many of you have looked at it, and I've had the ability to hear him and see him, and his work is available to be used, but I just want you to know that I'm learning from him constantly. I now have, I think, 3 of his books, which are looking pretty mangled, but I'm learning more and more about it all the time. And so I wanted to do a little bit of this because they do lead to our isms, which are everyday things. And I've got enough isms to make me look fatter than I am. I just carry them around all day. And we all do. We leave the house in the morning with a bag of rocks. Everybody carries their shh out of the house. I just said shh out of the house. And we leave in the morning with it. Hopefully by the time we come back at the end of the day, we might have left some of the stuff in there behind. Generally what we do is pick up more. We pick up more stuff that we don't need. And then you come home and you say, oh my God, I'm so tired. This has been such a bad day. This happened and that happened, and oh, I get on the telephone and I lament, and Brenda hears it a lot, Esther hears it a lot. I'm blah, 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 blah. It's 10 o'clock at night and I'm blah, 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 blah. What's happening? Because I haven't left it behind. I haven't left it behind, and many of you go home and don't leave it at the office like you're supposed to. You take it, you drag it in the house like some kind of dead cat. You're dragging it in by its tail, and the cat's not quite dead, and it's going as you're coming into the house, you know. And you get in there and that noise is still just flying around your head, and every time you turn around, this cat is laying over there because you didn't leave it outside the door. I did a workshop once where I made everybody come in and take a rock, a small little pebble, about hand size, and it took me a long time to find them all. And they had to keep it with them all day long. And it was a 3-day conference. So I said to some of them, keep your rock until you decide you can dispose of it. Make your rock the one thing that you think is most important for you to get rid of. And they did. You should have seen people at the banquets and at the luncheons with their rock next to them, because they have to keep it next to them all the time. And if they put it on the table and I happen to be around, I would say, since I was one of the administrators of the conference, you know, you're not dealing with your rock. Your rock's got to be close to you. Hold your rock next to your heart. Your rock is part of you. Your rock. So they'd have their rocks in their hand and be trying to eat or whatever. It's very interesting because after that conference was done, if you felt you could give up your rock, they put it in a clear bowl of water. Just gently drop their rock in there. And I said, there are 2 or 3 ways of really cleansing. The 2 most important are water and fire. Those are the 2 natural cleansers. So if you're going to take your rock with you, make sure that when you do decide to dispose of it, that you probably have to throw it in water and let it return to a natural state. 3 years later, I got a telephone call from a gentleman who I could not even figure out who he was. And he's saying, Miss Lois, I threw my rock away today. 3 years later, I threw my rock away. We belong to the same organization. In another life, I was a police officer. And so I worked with the National Black Police Association for about 25 years and did a lot of workshops for them. He carried a rock around until he actually was able to get rid of the issue. And I think that's something that we don't do often enough in our life. So we do carry around these behaviors that can result in unfortunate things for others. So here's a few quickies that my graduate assistant gave. and put together for me. She loves these strange pictures. Okay. So that's why we can't have nice things, okay? And then here's another one. But feminism is okay. All the rest of them are wrong, but feminism is okay, all right? So what are prejudices then? They're adverse judgments or opinions. And we're unreasonable, preconceived judgments or convictions. All black guys with pants hanging down are thugs and use drugs and may get you in the night. So you don't want to be seen on the same street with them at night because something bad could happen. That's a deeply ingrained belief in many people, particularly in women, but also in males. I had a student say in class one day crossing campus, he was moving in one direction by himself. It was like 7 o'clock at night, wintertime, dusky, and 3 African-American males and 1 Latino were coming to him, 4 guys. And he said, I was terrified. And I realized that my terror was not even explainable to me, but I was terrified. That's how programmed I am. And we all are programmed. I'm very programmed to be biased. I have my biases about the dominant group, but then I have to admit it, and my 3 friends here will say, I have my love for the dominant group because that's who I grew up with. But I also have my issues with the dominant group based on what I learned later on in life. We all have those. We are looking at something that's synonymous with our biases as well. To be biased about something is to say what? Anybody? To be biased? Anybody? Hello, class. What is a bias? It's a prejudice. Yes, it is. But what else is it? It's an assumption. What else? It's an opinion. What else? It's a thought, and it's part of being programmed to be biased. Okay? So isms are things that people say when they open their mouths and speak without first engaging their brains. Okay? Here we go. We have ethnocentrism, ism. Prejudices against people of certain ethnic groups. So we tell jokes about Polish people, we tell jokes about Latino people, we tell jokes about Asians, we tell jokes about people who are old. Believe me, I know them, and I do drive a Buick, but I don't drive down the middle of the road with blue hair on Sunday mornings coming from the beauty parlor, okay? But I do drive a Buick. I like a Buick. It's a big car for old people. All right. And mine is red, and her name is Ruby Dee. Okay. We've got ableism, prejudices against people with disabilities. Early on, those take place because oftentimes we don't tell small children it's okay to look, it's okay to ask questions, it's okay to want knowledge. What we do is say, shh, don't say anything. And the minute you say, shh, don't say anything, you put a bias in that child against disabilities. We can't do that. Sexism, prejudice against people based on gender. I like men, sort of. They have their uses. They take out the trash. They can wash dishes, if you make them. They can diaper babies. And you can have beautiful sons. I do. But we have our gender issues. We have our gender issues. And all of those will lead to inappropriate behaviors, not intentional, but often inappropriate. And we can talk about things like workplace harassment, sexual harassment in the job, incivility and bullying, workplace violence, prejudices and biases, and ethics violations. And those violate the NASW Code of Ethics. If you look at your Code of Ethics, we're not supposed to go there. But workplace harassment is a very interesting thing. It does happen. One person can be singled out by another person in an office for various reasons. It could be jealousy. It could be because they heard some gossip. It could be because this person isn't performing the way everyone else is performing and not being held to the same standards. That becomes an issue for some people, and they might unintentionally begin to pick on an individual within the office. Workplace harassment can also be something as simple as a workshop that I did for United Way in Grand Rapids where 2 young men of color were the only 2 young men of color in this organization. One was very tall and very dark, and he was of African descent. That is, he was a immigrant to the United States, and the other one was African American. One was light-skinned and wore glasses and had curly hair. The other one was tall and dark and did not wear glasses. They were both called Chuck by all of the other employees. I always get you two mixed up, okay? And that happened 2 years ago at United Way in Grand Rapids, Michigan, and that was the first time that either of them had ever spoken about it, and it was in a workshop like this. And I asked, well, why did you bring it up today? He said, because I felt I was in the right environment, but I've never been able to say it before. I'm not him, and he's not me. But one of them was named Chuck, so they both got called Chuck. That's a workplace harassment for them. That's an incivility for them. That's something that says you don't see them as individuals. That we know and so I had to say to the group, you know that you only saw them by color. You didn't see them as individuals with individual personalities. And you need to think about what that says about an entire organization. Or someone who is Latino and his name is Salvador, and he wants to be called Salvador because that's his name. But some of his colleagues think it's okay to say Sal. Now, if I tell you my name is Lois, and you're teenagers and you say Loas, then I don't want to be called Loas, though I was. And it wasn't low, it was relatively high then. But things do fall. Great people, great behinds, they fall. Okay, so the point is that it's harassment. And you need to look at harassment that way, not just through the lens of saying, well, I'm being sexually harassed. That happens too. We don't really even have to talk about what sexual harassment is because most of us clearly understand it. It becomes part of the code of your workplace. But this business of harassment on a workday level, we don't think about that as much. When it comes to incivility and bullying, it can take place at work, but we know it takes place in other organizations, and in particular we're talking about schools where children bully one another, but you can be bullied in your office. There can be a bully in your office. And people just avoid that person, step around them, don't engage very often, or give them plenty of room because you're not quite sure what to do with it. Because to confront and say, I can't bear it when you walk up on me and give me no space because you want to transmit some information. That's bullying in one of its finest senses. When a person uses their own space to invade your space to get a message across. You don't have to do that. But we find that we have coworkers who do that to us from time to time. Workplace violence, we've seen enough of that on the television. We have some ideas of what that is. Prejudices and biases, we've been talking about them. And ethics violations is what Dr. Amungi, or good friend Mathani, has wanted us to talk about. And we're going to do that as well. But these are important for you to keep in mind as you are in the workplace, when you're working with others. And here are some of them. These are all taken from Wing Sue, from Bailey, from Conreal. Let's see, who are some of the other people I took these from? Oh, a writer. I can't think of her name right now, but I'll get it. Here we are. These things are really very important. The unreasonable interference with work performance, I think, is one that we ought to think about quite a bit in terms of what is workplace harassment. And sometimes in your agency, these things are taking place. But we generally tend to be quiet about it. And then we say, it is what it is. Or I can't do anything about it. Or I can't make any changes here. What do you think, just in terms of a small, brief discussion, are any of you familiar with any of these in your workplace? Can I just see hands? And may I ask, that's quite a few hands, by the way, do any of you do anything about it? Because those are 2, 3 very good comments on this, because these things do take place in the work area, and they are debilitating, and they are draining, and you do go home at night carrying some of these issues with you and thinking about going back into them the next day, which can be an issue for you. And there are things that we as service providers have to think about in terms of, as the gentleman over here said, our own healthy well-being. And I know how difficult it is to leave it at the job place. It really is really difficult. You're dealing with human beings on a regular basis. Your lives, unless you're very careful, can sort of touch that borderline. The enmeshment can happen, and sometimes you're unaware of the fact that it's happening, and you have to step back really, really fast and be very clear on it. But these kinds of things, when you are feeling it personally, you do take it home. I think it is exceptionally difficult. How do you handle it if you have 5 or 6 people and you know that harassment is coming to you and you supervise all of them? So what would be some of the steps that we would take in terms of self-examination, re-looking at all the documentation, reaffirming yourself in terms of your ability to do your job, perhaps talking to your supervisor about what's happening, looking for people with like experiences, all of those things. But any way you look at it, whichever direction that flows in, that tension and that conflict, it's a terrible thing to have to carry around. It's one of those rocks I was talking about that we carry around. And you got to figure out how to undo them. Yes, ma'am. And it is a terrible experience for kids. It's interesting, though, when you allow people freedoms to make decisions for themselves, how reluctant we are, even if you're being bullied. No, I don't want to tell on him, because if I do, then I'll get beat up again. You know, it's that kind of thing that can happen even in the workplace. If you go to a supervisor about someone's behavior, and then the supervisor has to talk to that individual, greater retaliation. It's a kind of a cyclical kind of thing. How do we handle it as workers in these situations? Just keeping in mind that they are taking place, that we are living in environments where conflict is simply a part of what we do every day, because we're human beings. How do we work better as human beings? It's sort of like, can't we all be nice to one another? Apparently we can't, not just on agency bases, but globally. Being nice to one another is not a popular thing. Working with human beings means that we have to figure out how to do it. This happens to co-workers, it happens to non-employees, it happens to the vendors. They can share in it both ways. Customers, suppliers, supervisors, managers, all of those people can be involved in this. And the most important effects are, of course, our stress, the social isolation you feel, sometimes loss of financial security, anxiety, and I well know the one called anxiety. On a personal level, my entire body can clench up. I mean, physically I can react to anxiety. Loss of self-esteem, depression, physical symptoms. I've seen people at work who just simply had a headache every day. People who would throw up at work. People who would come to work and have to go home because they couldn't stay. I've seen students come into classes where they feel like they cannot make it and they fall apart within a class, or they are totally silent and can't open their mouths, and after class will come to you and say, I really wanted to talk, but I'm afraid that everybody will laugh at me what I'm going to say. Or somebody else said what I was saying, what I was thinking before I said it. And I said, that's okay, you can say it again. You can say, I agree with that because so-and-so and so-and-so. But they don't know until you open doors for them. I have a class right now where in communities, they teach themselves. I may do 5 lectures, the rest of the class is theirs. And they are creating a community. The class has now become a community. They are building a community. They have to come up with everything from the size of the community, the budget of the community, the kind of housing in the community, what kinds of social workers will be needed in the community, what will the agencies look like, who's going to be director of them, what kind of populations are they going to be working with. So they have 16 weeks of building a community and designing their own syllabus. Giving them that opportunity to do it was totally frightening. Totally frightening for them. No, we want the syllabus. I mean, I like structure in my life. I like to know what I'm going to do. I need to know the rubrics. I need to know the points. I don't think I can do this. But then gradually, as they thought about it, they began to talk among themselves, because I gave them a half an hour each day, each time we met, just to talk about what it would be like. For the first 2 weeks, they had a half an hour to talk about it. By the 3rd week, especially since we had these snow days and they had to do it all on Blackboard. And Grand Valley has never closed twice in a row for school, for snow, but we closed this year, so you know we have more than you do. And they came to the conclusion that they would teach their class. So now between Google Doc, Blackboard, and being in class on Mondays, I take notes. I'm aware of what's happening. They hand me an agenda for the day. We do class. I have my half hour for lecture. The rest of the class is theirs. You would be surprised at how well they're doing when they're told, it's yours, you create it, you do it. And I think that that takes away some of the fear of classrooms and says to you as a graduate student, you have the capability of doing all of these things. You don't have to always go to class. I mean, I'm standing here in front of how many people? Too many for me to even think about, really. A big, big group of people to try to do something interactive. And I'm the one that's coming up with the information, supposedly. I'm just one mind. There's 100 people out there. Imagine the power that you have as 100 minds if synergy were really something you believed in. You could throw me up against the wall if you engaged. If you engaged, there's that much energy. You could power this building with electricity. They wouldn't have to do anything. They'd just tell the power place, cut it out, we're going to run it from here. That's the kind of power we have collectively. So when we're talking about some of those things that happen in the workplace, think about the collective sense and what you can do to make change. Because each person can make change, and many people can make change. Social workers talk about making change all the time. Why not start at home? Why not start in the agency? It's hard to do, but it's something to think about. It's something to think about. So as I move on, and I'm trying not to talk too much, but I said I had diarrhea of the mouth, and I need to get something more interactive. So we've gone through how we look at isms and how we look at prejudices, but let me look again at another ism before we take a break. Okay, anybody familiar with any of these? Can anybody add some to it, please? I'm looking for people to add some to it. The other day in work, one of my dearest colleagues said to me as I was admiring another person's beard, I'm just admiring this man's beard and saying it's the best in the house, it's really beautiful. As I walk around the corner, the dear friend says, yours isn't so bad either. Did we all laugh? Yes. But could someone say, that's inappropriate? That's a terrible thing to say? Is that an ism? It wasn't even an ism. But someone else who might have heard it might have said something else about it. I think about these things all the time and what it means to have a collegial way to work where people can talk to each other without saying these kinds of things that hurt. That suit is not right for your body. I have a little sister who does that to me all the time. I don't think you should wear that. I really love her, but I'm not sure that I always like her, but I don't think you should wear that. Or that material in that just isn't good enough. What are you, blind as a bat? Did you get any last night? Sexual harassment. You forgot again? What's your problem? Is your Alzheimer's acting up? Mine's lurking around the corner, I'm sure, but it doesn't act up. He rides the short bus. You look really hot in that outfit. Anybody got anything they can add to it? Throw it at us. Yes. Holler, holler.
Were you born yet?
Were you born yet? Yes. Okay. Any others? Anybody? You've heard them. Say them. Yes?
That's so retarded, or that's gay.
That's so retarded. That's gay. Yep. Another one. Anybody?
It's my OCD.
Oh, yes. It's my OCD. Okay. So are you on Ritalin? That's the kind of thing people say. I mean, just think about the kinds of things we can. You know, we can stop the use of them simply by not harassing others, not providing feedback for others. And you can report harassment, though we've talked about it. It's difficult to do. But we can attack the problem, not the person. And we can look for good in those who are most frustrating. In grade school and high school, I had a nemesis named Janet. I met her the first day in kindergarten. I had a library card at the age of 4, and I was using it a lot. So when I went to school that first day with Miss Lawrence, who was the kindergarten teacher for all 10 of us, I had my books, even though my sisters told me not to. I took my books with me, and I was so disappointed that we never did read that entire morning. That was just like, Mom, they didn't read. But what we did do is play in the sandbox, and we colored. So I colored, and Janet was standing next to me. I'd never seen her before, and she said, you know, you don't have to stay inside the lines. You can color outside the lines. We're going to cut them out anyhow. So I colored outside the lines, and when Miss Lawrence looked at it, she said, this is not good. You don't know how to stay inside the lines? And I knew right then, I had an enemy. And we were enemies from that day forward. Janet and I really had problems. She regarded me as a nigger, just that simple. And that was the way it was. I just simply didn't feel like I had to take that from her. I have to tell you, I put 2 boys in the hospital in grade school. It wasn't really meant to be mean. It was just to prove a point. I was sorry that it happened the way it did. John Anderson really fell down a hill, but that was only because I was faster than he was, and he wasn't aware that the hill was that close. And so that was, oh, the bell rang for recess. I'll go in, you stay there. And I went in. I was not a good kid, not a good kid. But Janet became even badder than me. So from that day on, it was just a pure battle. And we got selected to play the leads in a school Christmas play. I was, you ready for this? I was Frosty the Snowman. Okay. And Janet was the little girl in the village. And we both could sing. I was an alto from the time that I could open my mouth, and she had one of the most beautiful soprano voices, even as a 2nd and 3rd grader with vibrato in it. She literally was gifted with a golden voice. Beautiful, just unusual. So here we were supposed to be singing this duet. Twice we had 2 duets, and I was telling my mother I couldn't do it, just couldn't do it. I mean, I beat her up at church. What, that doesn't say a lot about me. So that was after choir. So my mother said to me, you see these African violets I have here? And she loved African violets and had like 20, 30 of them going all the time. She said, I nurture them, I water them. I turn them to the sun. That's why they blossom. And if you nurture and water Janet and think about her positively, and if you turn her to the sun regularly and don't think negative thoughts, you can do this. And she was right. But I actually, in the 5th grade, had to work very, very hard to look at Janet as someone that, as my mother said, the 2 of you make beautiful music together. That's the only thing you need to focus on. And that's part of your sunlight, turning it to the sun. I managed to get through that whole piece with Janet Hawkins, and yes, we did very, very well. We did very well. But even in the 9th and 10th grade, we were not friends. So I called her my nemesis because she's also the one in the 9th grade. And I was also retarded, probably in the sense that I didn't mature in terms of critical thinking as fast as I should outside of a book. So when we were talking about who was poor and who was not poor, I said, well, I don't know if we're poor. I knew that we ate better than everybody else in town because my parents had a catering business and my dad worked in the A&P, and food was our whole existence. Can you tell? And when Janet said, well, the Sagis are poor and the so-and-sos are poor, and I know that this people down the block, the people that live down by you, Lois, those mostly are poor people. And I said, well, I'm not sure we're poor. So she looks at me and she says, well, you're colored, and everybody knows that all colored people are poor, so you're poor. And everybody else looked at me. All the other girls looked at me, and I thought, now I got to kill her. Well, I didn't kill her, but I went home and I asked my mother, were we poor? And she said, we're poor in pocket, but not in spirit, which was another learning lesson from this woman about how we look at people. But all the time, I knew the undercurrent of Janet's dislike for me and her constant bullying of me had not so much to do with who I was, but what she saw me as, which was nigger. So it gave her the privilege and the right to speak and behave the way she did. I must say that we both formed posses early on in our childhood, though we didn't call them that then. She had her girls, I had my girls as lookouts for each of us. So that was a learning lesson, and by the 5th or 6th grade, I'd figured out, okay, I can live with a Janet in my life. I don't have to be this way all the time, and I don't have to be bullied by her, and I don't have to let her call pot shots at me. I can just be who I am, and it's okay. But it's a hard lesson to learn, early or late in life. And so when we are looking about at this issue, find a way to deal with the issue, and you don't let the crabs get you down. And you ask. You don't accuse, you ask. And you can speak to a coworker privately about their actions, which is always very hard to do because you know that there can still be retaliation. We're going to do race, gender, and sexual orientation, but we're going to take our break first and then be back here by 10:15 and move forward. Thank you. And I'll have a couple of more exercises, maybe 3 or 4 for you. Thank you. I'm about ready to get started, and what we're going to start with is a DVD that some of you may have seen, I'm not sure. It was one of the Sundance Awards in 2000 or 2001. A young man named Brian McDonald came up with Angry Young Man Productions. This is something in which you should chortle and laugh, but you should also think about very seriously. I need to ask first, is there anyone in the room with clown phobia? Well, it's kind of very important because people who do have it are very uneasy since this does depict clowns, and I have had people who have had to leave the room as a result of it, so I have learned to ask if anyone has that issue. So if there's no clown phobia in the room, we will go ahead with this particular piece, and if you would not mind making little notes about what you see and what you hear in here so that we can have a discussion. And may I also say I am absolutely delighted with your participation, with people raising their hands and suggesting and indicating to me that you are engaged and that there is some learning and experiencing for both you and for me while we're in this process, because you always learn from people that you're working with because they come up with things that you've not thought about before that you have to make a note about. So I just want you to know that I appreciate you helping me move along in my learning experience as well. This is called Whiteface. Do not take offense to the title, please, but it's because they're clowns, and so here we go with Whiteface. How many populations did you see in this? Just call out some of them. How many people could this apply? How many populations could this apply to? Mumbling.
Hispanic.
Pardon?
Hispanic, Black.
Okay. Yeah, it could be Hispanics, it could be Blacks, it could be LGBTQ, it could be disabled, it could be immigrant population, it could be transgender, well, I said LGBTQ, it could be any group that you wanted to plug in there would pretty much fit in there in terms of how we handle it. There were also a number of things, just like I've been all morning intentionally using some microaggressions and some micro-invalidations on a constant basis. Nobody's checked me on it yet. I do that in my classes fairly frequently, and at one point I'll say, oh, come on, I know you heard what I just said. You people are just a mess. And they'll, did you not hear? Did you not, So throughout this conversation, I have sprinkled some microaggressions, some micro-invalidations. I've used some isms. I've stated some prejudices, but I have not been checked on it because that's not what we usually do. Think about it. Think about some of the things I've said, and somebody in here before you leave today needs to check me. Right, thank you very much. I did that intentionally. I did refer to myself and not as someone else because I would not go in that direction, but I wanted to know that somebody heard that. That like you heard the principal say, you people. You heard the clowning around, but did you hear the you people? Did you hear all the other pieces that were said in there? That, well, of course, you got the mime. I can't understand a word she says, which I just love. But this has, if you watch it again, if you're, you can get it off of Amazon, you may be able to stream it as well. Watch it again and see how many other things that you can notice about our behavior as human beings in this particular world. I would like also, yes?
I'll call you out on the numerous ageist comments that you made about yourself as well.
Okay. The numerous stages? Ages, yes. I've done a lot of ageism. But nobody, I do those things because you need to hear how often we just do them. And so I'm hoping that people are listening to me hard enough to say afterward, because someone has already come to me. Where are you? Yes. Please, would you share?
Yeah, I had at the very, very beginning about short comment, that she asked you to stand because you were short, but the other people didn't have to stand when you were being introduced. And being very short, obviously I'm aware of that. But again, I didn't want to call it out. We just started. I'm not going to be like But I did go up to you.
Yes. And that's what people are supposed to do. I have a couple of nieces who are the 6 feet plus, and a goddaughter who is literally 6'3" and loves to wear 4-inch heels. So she's way above everybody. But you could ask Lisa how tall she was, and she learned early on, because by the time she was in the 6th grade, she was like, as she said, I'm a giant in the class, Aunt Lois. But she says, when people say, well, how tall are you? She says, 5'6". She's virtually up here, because she says, I'm just tired of people saying, how tall are you? Obviously, I'm fairly tall. And why should I have to tell you? Do you walk around to someone who's 5'6" and say, how tall are you? No. Yes.
I think that goes back to what the questions were like, the nose thing, and if that's a microaggression. And I said absolutely yes, because when someone just comments on your physicality and tells you you're not seeing, that's all you can see.
Mm-hmm.
You're not seeing past this big hair or whatever, my shade. And if you're constantly hearing that all the time, you're left thinking this person is only attending to my physicality.
Mm-hmm.
And that's wrapped their interests beyond anything else. And that's it.
Absolutely. That's it. You will find in your folder a little drawing that deals with colonialism, classism, and racism. Just so we can begin to run through Dr. Sue's stuff, this is something that I came up with by myself. It's not a theory yet. It's not an anything. It's my kind of look at maybe how some of this started. And we have to start with colonialism. Dr. Amungi and I talked about this when she was still in Grand Rapids. If you start with colonialism and you recognize the fact that originally the only people who came to this country were whites. The natives were already here. American Indians, Aborigines, Native Americans, whatever name it is that you apply to them. Not that that's appropriate, but that's what we do. There were inhabitants here already. But white colonialists came, chartered. They also brought with them primarily people who were less thans. They came out of the prisons, they came off the streets, they were prostitutes, they were homeless, they were people who were going to be prosecuted by the courts unless they chose to come here to start this new country in this new land. They were here as early as 1525. Jamestown itself rose and fell 3 times. The first year that they were in Jamestown, 500 people came, indentured servants and the landed gentry. At the end of the first year, only 60 were alive because they could not handle the climate. They could not figure out how to live. The Thanksgiving thing that we've all been taught, I would just ask you to put that in the book and put it on the shelf and forget it, because it didn't happen that way. Okay. So if you're thinking about that dinner, it didn't happen. The tribe that was there, the Powhatans, were very aggressive and very assertive about land being taken and treaties being broken and all of that sort of thing. So there was not this coming together that we've been taught. There was some claim in the beginning, some embracing of the newcomers by the people who were already here. But when they learned about the assertiveness of the newcomers, it became a different kind of a story. But everybody who arrived here was an indentured servant other than the landed gentry. They had signed a 7-year contract. And the deal was live through the contract. The work was grueling, hard, you had little to live on, and less to think about staying to live on. And those who were landed, who were the chartered people who owned the territory now by right of claiming it, sticking a stick in the ground and claiming land as yours that you've never seen before, they were the power people. So we have colonialism to begin with, and we have also a separation of people, so we are dealing with classism immediately. Colonialism with classism on top of it, okay? And in 1619, 20 Negroes arrived on a ship. And it wasn't necessarily a slaver ship, it was a Dutch ship that had marauded a Spanish ship that had these 16 Negroes on it. And that ship was lost and ended up on the Virginia coast. They had run out of food and water, and they exchanged the 16 Negroes who were not slaves. They were simply Negroes who had been taken to be enslaved, but as yet they had not been enslaved. And they were traded for food and drink. So those 16 Negroes became indentured servants, not slaves. They too put their X on a piece of paper. They had the same rights as all of the other indentured individuals. And indentureship, we know, is not much different than enslavement, but at least you had some option of saying, I can get out of this. Well, it did happen. And within 25 to 30 years, there were free Negroes who had actually survived their indentureship. One was named Anthony Johnson. This is historical information. He managed to survive. He even survived the latest Powhatan journey into the Virginia, what city am I trying to come up with? Can't even come up with it now. Jamestown it was then, but he survived. Only 53 people out of 300 and some survived, and he was one of them. And as historians track him, he owned property. He soon was free. He married another woman of color from another plantation. Tobacco was what they grew, and they grew it in enormous abundance because it was the one thing that England wanted. So there were literally seas of tobacco being grown. If you survived your indentureship, you got a suit of clothing, a pair of shoes, a bushel of seed, and 50 acres of land. And if you could make that work, then you could keep acquiring land. By the time Anthony Johnson was 35 years old, he had acquired a wife, 2 children, a home of his own, and he had 250 acres, 6 people working for him, and at least 3 of them were white. That's the way America started. That is the way it started. Ali Mazarui is the person who's done that research, and so has Skip Gates. I shouldn't say Skip Gates, Professor Gates. He's done the research with him. It's all there for you to read. It's also in a DVD called The Terrible Transformation, Africans in America. It's called Africans in America, but the first section is called The Terrible Transformation. Now, all of that took place by 1641, okay? But in 1641, 3 indentured servants ran away. One was Scotch, one was Dutch, and one was African. And they all 3 fled their indentureship, and they were captured 3 days later. They all received 30 lashes apiece. The 2 white men were also reassigned to their former indentureship for another 3 years, and they had to pay a fine. The black one received indentureship for life, 1641. By 1652, the state of Massachusetts was the first to declare indentureship or enslavement for Africans forever. And it moved down to the South. It did not begin in the South. It went from Massachusetts to Connecticut, Connecticut to Delaware, and then from Delaware to Virginia. So the history that we've been taught is generally not really that accurate, and you have to really read and research. And I love history. If I could start over again, I would probably be a history major and an anthropologist, because that would be where my heart is. And so I look for things to learn from. But we are not taught this at all. We are not taught that this country began that way. The fluidity that was out there in the beginning, for some reason, needed to be changed. And part of it is probably because of the economics. If you can identify one group as different, then maybe it's good to try a test run or a pilot project, as it were. At any rate, it worked, and it became a very economic issue. And to this day, historians still discuss the fact of whether it's economic or was it race. I'm not going there. But when we look at colonialism, classism stacked on top of it, then racism stacked on top of that, what we are looking at is the most fertile ground in the world to create a society that is able to manifest these silos of ableism, heterosexism, lookism, sexism, homophobism, ageism, and out of that can come all of these other issues that we deal with every day. You have to have fertile ground, and this was very fertile ground, drenched with blood and sweat and tears, so you could grow almost anything in it. But most of what grew in it was malignant. My theory, my story. And the deal is, how do we cleanse the ground? How do we cleanse the ground to the point where we can create a society that doesn't show so many malignant behaviors? America is a wonderful country. It's a superstar, but remember, it became a superstar within 250 years. Because if all the money comes in and very little goes out, you can accumulate. Do understand that Wall Street was built by cotton. Built by cotton. So we have a superpower because of our economic abilities. And those who were of the dominant group saw the possibilities in open land and acquiring it or taking, however you wish to look at it, and removing another group. There were 28.1 million Native Americans in this country at one time. There are approximately 2.1 who identify as Native American at this time. And if we want to worry about what's happened, we talk about extermination. So we refer, some of us refer to what happened to Native Americans as the first Holocaust. The first Holocaust. And we need to think about it that way. And in acquiring, then you can move people out of the way. And when we look at the hierarchy in which we work, it can happen to you too, only now we call it bullying. We don't exterminate people, we just bully them out of their jobs. So when you look at the history of the country, and you think about the video that you just saw as well, and you put in all the populations that can be oppressed, we come out of a kind of an environment that says, this is how we move forward. As social workers, again I remind you that we take an oath that says we are about change. We are about change. But I don't think we look closely enough, and I began with this in terms of how we look at ourselves. So there is an exercise in here that says, Activity 1, getting to know your cultural descriptors. And I'm not going to ask you to do it today because we have a time factor we have to deal with, but I do want to talk about it a little bit. It says, using a mind mapping technique, have students write their name in the center circle. And you'll see on the second page there's a circle in which you fill out, you put your name in the center circle, and then you identify what you think you are, how you see yourself. This is taking your own lenses and looking at you. And then, once you've chosen your identifier, you take a partner, and then you discuss when you felt proud to be associated with an identifier and when you didn't feel so proud. And then we talk about the stereotypes that you found out about a dimension of your ability or the identity that fails to describe them accurately. It's an exercise that you should do with someone else, probably someone that you know well. And we won't do that today because it's a time factor in terms of 2 + 2. And then people are very reluctant to share. But it is through the very sharing process with a total stranger or with someone you know well. I prefer for students to do it only after they've been together for 4 or 5 weeks, to talk about who they are and to acknowledge. Part of the issue is to acknowledge. To acknowledge that a woman my size has a bias against fat people is really a crazy thing. It's one of my real biases because my mother raised us to think that we were supposed to be thin and slim, and I was for a long time, really I was. I call this hormonal. This is a hormonal change. Not because I love to eat food, hormonal. But that was the image that was in our minds. And because she had 5 daughters in a row, all of them had booties, butts. Okay, and I tell you, the woman was fierce about it. She every time you walked past her, she pulled one of our sweaters down because she wanted us to look like the other girls. On the other hand, she was also fearful, having grown up in Georgia, having been unfortunately raped at the age of 14. She was terrified that anyone would even notice that we were pretty or attractive. So my 2 older sisters got cloaked, and she fed them, and they were pretty girls. But she wasn't letting anybody look at them as girls. It's the only argument that I know about in terms of my father and my mother, in which my father won. My mother won everything silently, covertly, and very, very cleverly. But he said, you can't keep doing that. So the 3 younger girls did not have weight gain by the time they graduated from high school. But the 2 older ones did, and they've struggled ever since. About body image and how we saw ourselves and what our identities were supposed to be. And it took me a long time to acknowledge that I had real issues about this, and that to this day, I still, at my size, trucking in here, if I were 6'8", I'd be about the right weight. But I would truly have to be 6'8" to carry what I'm carrying. I got sons that are 6'2" and 6'3". They don't weigh as much as I do. I tell myself I carry it well. But the issue is that my identity, my own identity, is really messed up around this thing of weight. And if you ask any group of people, particularly that's one dominated by women, how many of you are in here are satisfied with your size? You might get 6 hands, right? How many of the women in this room are satisfied with their size? I have 1. I have 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Because we've been trained to believe that we shouldn't be satisfied with it, no matter what. It's not perfect. What is the standard? I don't know. But mine is truly African. Okay? That's the standard. I'm learning to identify with the fact that that's my heritage. And when I go to Africa, particularly West Africa, I am reminded. And you should see the women. They are so beautiful. They are so beautiful. So it's about your identity. Do that exercise when you have a chance. But here's the next exercise. It says reflect some more. Reflections for social workers, relationship to working with colleagues, read, stop, reflect on the word listed, reflect again, and then reflect some more. Which means I'm going to give you all of 10 minutes. And I want you to pick words in here, and I want you to pick a partner, and I want you to discuss what this means. What does the word service mean to you as a social worker? What do the words social justice mean? I need you to do that to talk about what we do as social workers. What is important here? What do we really believe? What does social justice mean to you? What does integrity mean to you? And every day at work, do you not look at your colleagues and think about integrity? Or do you not think about competence or ethical responsibilities? So pick 3. Pick a partner and start talking. Thank you very much. That's very, very important, I think, for all of us to think about, because as social workers have become more and more professional, we've moved further away from perhaps some of the original concepts. I mean, we usually refer to Jane Addams and her community work. Well, we've moved a long ways from that, and is that where we should be? It's sort of like I ask myself, I was formerly the admissions director at Grand Valley, and 2/3 of the students would say, I want to do clinical work, I want to be a therapist, because I like to help people. And I would say to myself, yes, I know. And I tell people, and so does a colleague of ours, when you come into the School of Social Work, tear up your Save the World ticket, because it's not going to happen. On the other hand, to have that kind of a global perspective is something we do need, that the world does have some issues. I want to, now that you've gone through a little bit more reflecting, take a look at these microaggressions in everyday life, and race and gender and sexual orientation. We went through that, and I mentioned the numbers of people. It's the constant and continuing every day It's the everyday reality that some people go through in terms of slights and insults and being marginalized. It's like saying to someone, because I'm an African American woman, I really get worried about Obama. It's just like he gets beat up an awful lot. And yes, I did vote for him. And no, I didn't vote for him because he was black. I voted for him because it was the first time I was able to vote for a black person. How's that? At any rate, we constantly have to deal with this on every level. If you're overweight, you deal with it. If you're short, you deal with it. If you're disabled, you deal with it. If you're a person of color, if you're an immigrant, we do deal with things and comments that are said all the time. So the power of microaggressions really is in the fact that the person who is committing the microaggression is usually unaware of it. And they really don't mean any harm by it. So that's from Sue. Now, here's everyday life. Here's one for you. I won't read it to you. You read it to you. That's a quote from the newspaper. Okay, and that's what he said. Is this a microaggression? Is it a, you know? I mean, that's a storybook. Okay? Here's another one. My grad assistant helped me with these, so she pulls out things that she thinks work too, and so do I. He's not, okay? And I can remember when my son was 16 years old, and at that time he was about 6'2", really beautiful. He's old now. He comes home and he says, "Mom, every time I get on an elevator with women, they always move to the back of the elevator." And I said, "Really? What kind of women?" He said, "Well, you know, I just sense the fact that maybe they're scared of me." And we were living in Ann Arbor. So I said to him, you need to think about that. You need to think about what you represent and who you are and what that says to people. So you know that as an African American mother, I'm raising my children to learn different things about how you live in a world that's dominated by other people, and that they have to have protective devices in place so that they won't get in trouble. So that clutching the purse thing, I really sort of like was able to connect with that, because it does say, you and your group are criminals. Complimented for speaking good English. Of course, you could have been born here, you could have been Japanese, and your family has been here since 1890, or you know, you could be Latino and your family has been here in America since 1525, because it was America, I mean, it was Mexico before we took it. So you've been here all that time. Here you go. I am not a passive woman. I don't know if you can tell. Women should occupy nurturing and not decision-making roles. A lot of that has changed. It's getting better, but is it where it ought to be? We had this mentioned earlier, using the term gay. This one underneath it is one that always amazes me, and this comes directly out of Wing Su's book. Mm-hmm. You know, it's the way we see things. We have been socialized into a society where individual, institutional, and societal biases really are associated with race, sex, and gender. Okay? And very few of us, he says none of us, I'm always saying there might be someone out there, are immune, and it's not old-fashioned. Those are, his calls them microaggressions. They're contemporary. And these forms of bias are usually invisible, unintentional, generally subtle, usually outside the level of conscious awareness. But they do present dilemmas for those who are the recipients. They really do, on an everyday basis. They create a hostile and invalidating climate for marginalized groups. It does sap your spiritual and psychic energies. Their cumulative nature can result in depression, frustration, anger, rage, loss of self-esteem, anxiety. They're brief. They just slip in and out of the conversation. And they're a part of that system that I said the ticker tape is running through the back of your head all of the time, and we are thinking, assessing, measuring, looking, viewing on a constant basis the other. I tell the students all the time, do not in this class from this day on say that they are different from me. What you have to learn to do is say, I am different from them. And until you can flip that coin, you don't even begin to deal with a balance as long as everyone is different from you. You are different from them. And it's a lesson that works. It's a lesson that works. Microaggressions are subtle, stunning, and sometimes you don't even know it's happened, and it's like a razor blade slice across your arm and you don't know what happened until the blood is there. And then you're not sure whether you should respond or not. So the term micro-inequities is used in the world of business. Inequities. Keep in mind that equality is something that we can't achieve, but equity might be. Equality would be going into a facility such as this one and finding out that there were 2 bathrooms for women and 2 bathrooms for men. That's equality. What you gotta have is 15 bathrooms for women and 3 for men. That's equity, okay? And that's a reality. Here we go. They're pervasive and they're automatic and they're dismissed, or we choose not to deal with it or not to say anything. We don't become allies and stand up, as one woman mentioned earlier. But they are detrimental. And they're particularly detrimental to people of color, to immigrants, to people who are new to this particular society or have not been allowed access. Access is important. If you don't get allowed access for a number of reasons, you can't talk about, well, you had the same choices everybody else had. Because people don't have that. Our values, our assumptions, our biases, our communication styles, as you found out in the beginning, are some of the things that can turn up in your own cultural baggage, and we all do have it. So they explain right here, neatly folded into one corner, views of time. The other corner, gender roles. Check the zippered pouch and you find your sense of personal space and comfort level with confrontation. And then there's the other gestures and mannerisms. And they happen when we least expect it and we're not even aware of it, okay? So we can feel vulnerable and we can feel frustrated and fearful, and we're afraid to say things, well, I don't know what to call you people. What do you want to be called? That's one that people are familiar with. We do these things because we're serious, we're sincere. I don't know how you want to be called. Do you want to be an African American or black? I don't know which one to say. I don't know what do you want to be a Latino or do you want to be a Hispanic? Which one should I say? Those are normal questions, but they're also like, they make you wake up. It's a zinger. It's a zinger. Some of them are based on expectations and perceptions instilled in us by our respective cultures. People who arrive here as immigrants have real perspectives about what it means to come to America. They really have got some interesting ideas about who we are, and what we do. And you know every American is wealthy. That's the first thing you start with. Every American has money. So how close do you usually stand from a friend while you're talking? How close is too close? How much eye contact is too much? Because in many cultures, eye contact is a verboten. You don't do it. How comfortable are you when someone touches your shoulder or arm while talking with you? Do you think they're invading your space? When does it become too much? If you show up at a party 10 minutes late, does someone say something about it at CP time? Or do you just show up at a party because you chose to? How is your dialogue with others? Are you a direct speaker or are you an avoidant speaker? That can depend on your culture. You say things, some things are inappropriate, some things are appropriate. If you're Native American, your cultural response and your direct line of conversation is very different. Eye contact is not something that you generally do. Cadence is slower. Words are chosen with care, and they don't talk a lot. They don't have diarrhea of the mouth. Most Native American people, when they're speaking, it's because they have something to say something that's profound and important. They don't waste words. They also, we talk about the difference in the way people raise their children. If you've noticed, a lot of Latinos or Hispanics, whichever one we're choosing, allow their children free range very early on, from the time they're little until they go to school. They can play, they can do what they want to do, and they're not chastised. If you're in a store, you can watch them racing back and forth, having a good time, pushing the carts, that sort of thing. It's because they need to grow up that way. That is what the culture says. So are we looking at people through this lens that says, oh, that's inappropriate behavior? When you see an African-American mother take her child by the hand and whack them once on the behind, what happens? So do we run to DHS? It's part of the culture. There are people who believe in spanking. I didn't, because I found my arm got tired, so I quit. When you're showing someone where something is, do you point with one finger, a whole hand? Do you know that for some cultures, putting up a hand like this is a taboo? Beckoning to someone like this is a taboo. They mean different things to different cultures, and you need to be aware of those. And you can find that information, and here's Nardo, of course, with Gilbert. So, read on. Okay? You know, but that might be a cultural issue. So culture and boundaries, the ability to know where you end up and where the other person begins. When we talk about needing space, setting limits, determining acceptable behavior, we're really talking about our boundaries. We're not talking about theirs, we're talking about our boundaries. And that's a difficult thing for even us to understand, that it's not, when we say we're defining boundaries for other people, we're really talking about the boundaries that we have, not necessarily the boundaries that we want to impose or say you need to deal with your boundaries. It works both ways. It's a two-way street. And sometimes our boundaries are higher than we think they are, and we don't always see over them to see the other person's boundaries. They can be difficult to grasp because they are things that we can't see and sometimes questionable, but just because we can't see them doesn't mean that they're not important. Boundaries are present whenever a person or a department interfaces with another person or another department. They're just there. They define limits and responsibilities. They allow an organization to work more efficiently. When we set proper boundaries, it can result in a sense of accountability for all of us. And job responsibilities can generally be more precisely assigned if we know what those boundaries are. And it's more than the cubicle that you sit in. They maintain good productivity, social dynamics. They give us the guidelines we need. And weak boundaries in the workplace result in utter chaos. Utter chaos. Poor performance, low morale, disrespectful staff, acts of violence, workplace bullying, all the things we talked about earlier. If we don't have our boundaries in place and understand them, but to define them not just for the client, but for ourselves in the workplace as well. Yep. Anybody been like this? I'm a great person for talking to anybody in the grocery store line. Or if I'm washing my hands at the sink next to another woman, I may say something. I tell you, I have diarrhea of the mouth. But I know that there are boundaries that you got to deal with. Every time somebody tries to break into our personal space, an alarm should go off in our heads. Not just because our space is being invaded, but we need to look at how often we invade somebody else's. So there was an exercise I was going to have you do, but in terms of time, we're not going to do that one. I have another one that I want you to do, but first we'll run through here. Are you an individualist? Are you a collectivist? Keep in mind that some cultures view time as linear, going straight ahead. Many others view it as a cyclical thing that continues. The continuum never ever stops. And we must be aware of it. Sticking to plans and schedules and guidelines are very valued by Americans, but not necessarily everybody else. If you've been on a tour in a Caribbean country or you've been in Africa, we will get there when we get there, is a common statement. And you do get there when you get there. So there's always thinking about what the other culture is doing. Tomorrow is another day is the thing that we say here in this United States all the time, but I don't think we think about it when we say it. Tomorrow is another day, which means we will get there when we get there. But if someone is late and they're out of another culture, an eyebrow might just go up just a little tiny bit. Okay? That's the kind of thing we're talking about. What's your communication style? Do you say what you mean? Do you save face? Are you silent? Do you want to keep harmony at all costs? Those are things you need to think about. And then nonverbal communication, you've already done. What's not being said is oftentimes more important than what has been said. So spatial relations become important with other cultures. How you arrange chairs in an office, who you speak to. If you come in with some cultures, you must speak to the man first, not the woman. You need to worry about your tactile communication in terms of being a touchy person. Keeping yourself to yourself is very important. Eye contact, as I said, direct eye contact suggests confidence and respect for us, but it doesn't mean that's the way it is in all the other cultures. And we need to be aware of it. And each person has, each culture has its own gestures. Thumbs up means a good job, or yes, okay. In most countries, by the way, this is still from Wing Tzu, I didn't say this, but in Iran it can mean up yours. Okay? Some of the things to remember. So personal spaces, and he's actually gone to the point of talking about it. And Americans have larger space boundaries than people from other cultures. If you notice someone backing up a little while talking to you, don't step toward them, as they most likely might feel uncomfortable, and that's why they've moved away from you. You can expect to have your personal space involved or entered into every now and then, and we know that there are times you can't do anything about it. But we need to be aware of the fact that that's how we operate and that's how we function, and that all cultures, if you notice, this one deals with not just culture, but the wealth culture as well. So there are two types of boundaries, external and internal boundary violations. External boundary violations include not having permission to do any of those things. So if I walk up to a total stranger and reach out and touch that person, I haven't had permission to do that. There's a way to say, may I? Or can I intervene? Getting into other people's spaces by checking their purses, listening to people's conversations, not allowing people to have privacy. Sometimes clients feel like they have no privacy whatsoever in their lives, that you want to know everything, including the size of their underwear, but they know nothing about you. And it's very difficult. Students feel that way as well. You get to look at your grade book, tell them everything they've done, write down notes about them, but they don't necessarily have an opportunity to say, well, what about you? Or can I see my own stuff? Because sometimes we don't even allow them to see their own folders because we have all of our confidential material about them in there. So who they get to be. When we expose people to dangerous diseases, internal gossip and intentional gossip is a bad piece to have in the workplace. So indicating by word or deed that another person is worthless, yelling, screaming, ridiculing, making fun of one another, lying, breaking commitments for no reason, being sarcastic, verbal put-downs, we've been through some of these, but they are all internal boundary invalidations. Job responsibilities, interpersonal boundaries, and personal boundaries. We need to be aware of them in the workplace, with our students, with one another in the workplace, and with our clients. And job responsibility boundaries are generally established by the chair, the boss, the person who is the leadership, and should help us to define our basic responsibilities and reporting relationships. They also help establish accountability, but as mentioned earlier, when that's lacking, your workplace can be kind of messed up. Who gives you your assignments? Who do you report to? Do you know all these things? Who gives you feedback? Who sets your work priorities? Do you know how to treat all the staff members and consumers fairly? Those questions, if you ask yourself when you go back into your workplace, you might help yourself straighten out where you are and how you fit into the system at work. Because oftentimes you don't know. I found myself recently, because of a job change, not knowing where do I now fit in the structure? What is my role? How do I report to people? And when you get to be older, when there's a job change, I can share this with you. My confidentiality and my self-esteem plummeted because I thought, and I'm still working through it, that it was ageism that said, no, you can't do this job anymore. And I am the oldest person in the department. And people ask me every day, when are you going to retire? And they do. People ask me all the time, you're still working? Well, yeah, I need the money. You know, that's one. And the other one is, I don't know what I would do if I stayed home. I'm not a stay-at-home person. I have a little bit of energy left. It's the one thing, teaching is the one thing for me personally that I know I do well, and it makes me feel good to go to work and teach a class. I just feel good, and I need that goodness feeling. And as long as I can do it, I'm going to do it. So my age has nothing to do with it, except don't go to a high school class reunion where you've been out for 60 years and people say, what? You're still at work, Lois? Yes, I'm at work. And then they look at me and I can hear Janet Hawkins, well, she's colored, she's poor, she's got to keep working. So, you know, it's a whole full circle. And I really felt for a while that it was about me and my age. And that worked. So I had to go and get a position for myself. I had to talk to the boss to say, what am I? Who am I? What is my role? And it's helped a little in terms of accepting where I am at this point. But you do have to find out where you are. And that question did help me. Here are some things that you all know. Tactfully tell people the effect their behaviors had on you. For instance, if a coworker says, I'll call you later tonight to discuss this project, you can say, don't call me after 6 or don't call me after 9, because they might call at the wrong time. The wrong way to say no is by being passive-aggressive and ignoring a request. And I'm guilty of passive-aggressiveness. Ask for what you need. If your work limit is over what you should be doing, then maybe you need to say something about it. Protect yourself. Self-care, as the gentleman over in the corner said, is very important. And all of those are boundary issues. So as often as you can, check what the policies are in your organization. Involve your supervisor when boundary violations occur. And then if you note, Wingsu has the piece on violations of sexual harassment. The tone people use with one another can be very, very impacting. And you've had people at work say things to you in a tone of voice that you felt like you went from this to this. The attitude and approach, the ability to focus on work objectives, even with people you do not like or with you whom you have differing opinions and beliefs. We teach our students to do that all the time by having them work in groups. And they begin liking the people and hating them at the end, or vice versa. They begin disliking them intensely and finding out that they made some good friends. We always hope for the latter. But they have to learn how to set limits and boundaries within the groups that we put them in. In all of our classes, I don't know about the rest of the schools of social work, but they do group work up the wazoo because they do need to learn how to work together. So when employers set specific boundaries and policies, examples might include some of these. This might be a very important one, the bottom one, no hanging of offensive or religious photographs in your office. Some people will be very concerned about that. What do you do as a social worker about people who hang religious issues, pieces in their offices? We have to worry about physical boundaries, mental boundaries, and emotional boundaries when we're talking about personal boundaries. And then an example, clash of racial realities, invisibility of bias, and perceived minimal harm, and then there's always a catch-22. And then here's dilemma 1. Did the person engage in a microaggression, or did the person of color simply misinterpret the action? Oh, you're just too sensitive. You don't have to react to that. So according to Wingsu, the racial reality of people of color is different from the racial reality of white Americans. Thus, when someone of color looks in the mirror in the morning, yep, they see a person of color. Unintentional expressions of bias, that's dilemma 2. The perpetuator of a microaggression is usually sincere in the belief that they acted without any kind of bias. So how does one prove that a microaggression has occurred? How do we make the perpetrator aware of it? And the most accurate assessment about whether racist acts have occurred is most likely to be made from those most disempowered rather than those who enjoy the privilege of power. So it's very difficult. Dilemma 3, minimal harm of racial microaggressions. When individuals are confronted, the perpetuator usually believes that the victim has overreacted, as I said, being overly sensitive or petty. And usually the dominant group considers microaggressive incidents to be minor, and people of color are encouraged by whites and oftentimes other people of color not to waste time, let it go, move on. It's a simpler thing to do because they do create self-doubt and frustration and isolation. And while they seem innocuous, they are not. And for some people, psychological well-being can be hampered. And these all come from the following individuals. And I'm putting them up so you'll be aware of it. Sue uses a lot of Soranzo's and Holder's work as well. Here are, create physical health problems, saturate the broader society with cues that signal devaluation of group identities, lower work productivity and problem-solving abilities are all things that happen from racial microaggressions. And then there's the catch-22 of responding. Should I respond or not? Did I think what happened really happened? Was this a deliberate act or an unintentional slight? How should I respond? Do I just go home and be mad about it? What are the consequences? All of those things happen. If I were a person with a disability and someone said, it's amazing how well you do that considering you only have one arm, that's a microaggression. Do I say something right then? Or do I go home and stew about it? What would you do? Because you already know that you're the different other in that person's eyesight. What would you do? That's the issue that we have to think about. So I switched this from color only to other disabilities, other issues as well, because I think it fits across the board, which is why I show you whiteface. But people of color rely heavily on experiential reality that's contextual in nature and involves life experiences from a variety of situations. And our situations can be a greater variety as people of color because the dominant group generally sees only one kind of variety of lifestyles because that's a choice that can be made. You don't ever have to spend time with a group of color if you don't want to. You don't have to live in the neighborhood. You don't have to have your children go to school with them. So that means that there, as one of my students who is white said to me, we've been boxed in. I grew up in a white neighborhood. I went to an all-white school. I went to an all-white church. All of my family is white. I never saw anybody another color or anything until I came here to school. And I was always told that everything was fine, and so I believed everything was fine. I did not know that everything was not fine until I came to school. And then I began to understand that I was the one who knew very little. And I said, well, that's not really true. She said, but I didn't know anything about another world other than mine. And that's where the issues begin to crop for people. So connecting the dots for people of color would say it's a non-random event. But whites evaluate the incident in isolation and they don't see a pattern of bias. So if you do live in this place where you don't have to make any comparisons, then that's isolation. So when you believe you're a good person and you've come from a good town and you've had good parents and you've had a good raising and you've had a good education, you do come out of that whole moral piece. I am a good person and I'm not a bad person and nobody is. They just simply have not gained the knowledge of the rest of the world. So that creates microaggressions. How one reacts is different for people based on power issues. Deciding to do nothing but sit on your anger is one response, and that causes microaggressions that can come up because you don't know how to respond, and it won't do any good anyway, and you do not engage in denial. And maybe the consequences are too great. Not doing anything has the harm that was mentioned before, and dealing with pent-up anger is a bad piece. So when we look at micro assaults, referring to someone by a racial epithet, discouraging interracial interactions, and serving a white patron before someone of color are examples. And of course, I'm old enough to have had that happen, but I also grew up in the Jim Crow era, so it really was happening. But it still happens today. And like the young lady in the back said, you can be in a restaurant and you can wonder whether your service is different from the dominant group if someone doesn't arrive in a timely fashion, or if the attendance of the wait staff is not the same way from your perception as it is for other people in the restaurant. Those things happen because you have grown up with these ideas programmed, just like the dominant group has grown up with ideas that are programmed. So microassaults are most similar to what's been called old-fashioned racism. And fortunately, we're moving away from some of it. Verbal remarks, comments. Micro-insults also consist of verbal and nonverbal behaviors, representing subtle snubs. LGBTQ, sizeism, and disabilities. How about the one, you'd really be pretty if you just lost some weight. But they always go, if you just lost some weight, because you know they're about to say, if you weren't so fat. Serious one, serious. Sizeism is far more important in this country than people recognize. It's the last bastion where you can just say whatever you want to say, because after all, if they're fat, it's just because they've been eating too much. We don't think about any of the physical or biological issues that might be there. We just have an issue in this country about people who are overweight. To the point that they have a television show called The 600-Pound Man. I can't go there. But it's on the TV because we have a fascination with what is different from us. And we can engage in our mental put-downs. Okay? So that still happens. LGBT, of course. And disabilities, yes. So I believe the most qualified person should get the job. Do you ever get asked, how did you get your job? I've been asked how I got my job. I don't have a PhD. I don't even have an undergraduate degree is what I tell people. I'm brilliant. It's just that simple. It's been recognized from a very early age. I've never thought that I wasn't, super exceptional. And my friends can tell you I'm super out there. I'm exceptional in that sense. I'm out there, okay? But I don't, but that happens. How did you get this job? Well, wow, I didn't know you worked there. Not qualified. Micro-insults can also occur when a teacher fails to acknowledge students of color or over-acknowledges them. A black male student in a criminal justice class. They're talking about crimes that are committed by teens. Well, Oliver, you know what I mean, don't you? Micro-insult, okay? And an invalidation at the same time. So they're also characterized by verbal comments and behaviors that exclude, negate, or nullify, okay? And that form of microaggression is also most likely to be unintentional. You negate people when you ask them where they were born. Asian people have been born in this country for hundreds of years. Or, how do you speak English so well? Oh, you're Korean, does that mean you're adopted? Okay, all of those things come out. Don't be oversensitive. Don't be so petty. Diminishing other people's feelings is a bad scene. Culture-bound values, class-bound values, and language variables. Use of standard English and emphasis on verbal communication. And really, we don't think often enough about what happens when we use verbal. I think I have a piece of paper down here that I just wanted to share for a minute. I thought I had it in here. Well, maybe I took it out and didn't do it. Okay, but we do put down people all the time. The ball is in your court. So if I'm from, let's say I'm from Venezuela and I speak one form of Spanish, and you tell me the ball is in your court, what am I supposed to make of that? What does it mean when you tell me the ball is in your court? And I don't really know what that is. So I'm out there looking for a ball, and I'm looking for a court, and we're in the office and you're telling me the ball is in your court? We don't think about what happens to other people who have arrived and haven't learned all of the nuances of the wonderful English language. The ability to engage in actions create conditions that maximize the optimal development of clients and client systems. Why can't we just move on? We keep talking about it, but I need strategies. I just need to know what to do. That's where we always are. And on the last few pages, you have some answers on becoming culturally competent. And I would hope that you would read them and go through them to let you know. And I do have just one little piece. I know that Mathoni is moving up here, but I have one piece that I think is important that you see. It's only about 3 minutes. It will make you walk away laughing, but remembering what you've seen. Service is not the same as helping. Helping is based on inequality. It's not a relationship between equals. And I think that that is something that social workers really need to think about. When you help, you use your own strength to help someone with less strength. It's as if I'm on the floor and you're pulling me up to your level. So fundamentally, helping, fixing, and serving are ways of seeing life. When you help, you see life as weak. When you fix, you see life as broken. And when you serve, you see life as whole. When we serve in this way, we understand that this person's suffering is also my suffering, that their joy is also my joy, and then the impulse to serve arises very naturally. Our natural wisdom and compassion presents itself quite simply. A server knows that they're being used and has the willingness to be used in the services of something greater. We may help fix many things in our lives, but when we serve, we are always in the service of wholeness. I read that only because for me, I have begun to understand what it means to serve far more than it means to help. And it's helped me in my inner self as well, in terms of knowing that this is about service. And so that some of the things that I do now, I accept more easily about myself. And so when I earlier said I'm an enabler and all these other odds and ends, I'm looking at that sense of self as not being an enabler, but in some ways I serve a portion of people who are unable to gain access from anyone else other than me. And I understand that now, and I don't negate myself or beat myself up for being, as I said earlier, the world's biggest fish, a sucker. But you have to be able to figure out where that boundary lies for you, and to be able to say no at the right time and yes at the right time. But I am now at the point in my life where I understand I can be in service and not worry about helping, but serving in terms of my humanity, my own personal humanity. And so I ask you to just think about that. It comes from the Zen channel, not channel, I'm trying to say Zen. You can just write in Zen and serve in your Google, and you will come up with this entire piece that talks about the struggle for understanding service within this world, whether you're doing it from a social work perspective, whether you're doing it from a religious perspective, whether you're Buddhist, whether you're Muslim, it's about serving. And so I leave you with that. I wish to thank all of you for being patient enough to put up with me. I hope there was something enjoyable today and that you learned something, because I certainly did. Thank you all again.